Story 1. This is entitled People on the Large Scale, and it's too hilarious not to share. I live in a small town, population 7,000 roughly, and everyone is currently divided over a Chinese restaurant. It's been in the local news and Australia's national news. That's how crazy people are getting. I'm going to try to keep this short. Back in May of this year, a local Chinese restaurant owner informed the local club he was renting kitchen space from that he wanted to retire, gave them his resignation, stating his last operating day would be the end of June. The local Karens and Kevins en masse. One local, who we will call Big Kevin, teamed up with another local we will call Mega Karen, and they decided they were going to protest against the closing and force the club to keep the restaurant open. This poor man has been running the restaurant for 30 years without break and just wanted to retire peacefully. But no, Mega Karen started a petition while Big Kevin organized a protest. Now our third major player in this we shall call the Wicked Witch. The Wicked Witch, working in the shadows, starts leaking to the local paper that said restaurant owner is being forced out by the club. False allegation. The club gives their first and only statement about the situation, stating that the restaurant owner retired and even produced his retirement paperwork for proof. At this point, the national news comes into it and does an interview with restaurant owner, who states on the news he wants to retire. You would think that would be the end of it, but no. Mega Karen gets 1,200 or so signatures on her petition, which she hands to the club. The club's lawyer calls it invalid due to over 900 of the signatures not being filled in properly. Signature plus printed name plus club membership number or phone number needed by each person to make it valid, or same person signed multiple petition slots. So Mega Karen starts a new petition which only gets 74 signatures. Meanwhile, Big Kevin organizes a protest he doesn't show up for, nor does anyone else. The club then hosts a meeting for all club members of the general public, and the club's board to discuss what is going on, but again, for all the complaints, no one shows up. Now Mega Karen and Big Kevin are demanding that a new meeting be held, the club's general manager be fired, and the club's board be disbanded, and a new board elected. The Wicked Witch then once again goes to the newspaper with a statement from the restaurant owner. The restaurant has now been closed for over a month and states that now the club has renovated the restaurant and has plans to start a new restaurant. The old restaurant would considered renting the space again. Before you question why the space wasn't renovated before this point, it was part of the Chinese restaurant's agreement that they would maintain and renovated the space as they saw fit, as stated by the club in their public statement. And she tells the paper that the whole reason the Chinese restaurant left wasn't because they wanted to retire, but because their rent increased from the $285 a week they have paid for 28 years to $385 a week last year, and then $485 a week this year for a restaurant space, when other local restaurants are paying $2,500 a week plus for the same or smaller places. So Big Kevin, Mega Karen, and a ton of other locals were all shocked at the cost of rent, which they are all now saying should have been kept at the $285 to encourage the restaurant to stay, even though it meant likely closing the club since they were struggling to afford running costs. The club even broke down their running costs to show the members and locals how expensive it is to keep the place open, but still not good enough. I can't with this town anymore. Story 2. I work in retail, and recently a customer purchased something online and had it delivered. After receiving the item, he decided he didn't want it anymore, so he asked to return it for a refund. I said, "Sure, no problem. Just send it back with the returns form found on our website and ship it back to us." He then became very upset that he had to print off a form. "Like most people my age, I don't have a printer," he exclaimed. So I said, "Okay, fine. You don't need to print out the form. Just include a handwritten note and ship it back to us." "And how am I supposed to do that?" he asked. "By taking it to the post office," I suggested. "And what? You're expecting me to pay for shipping?" he responded. "Well, it's your choice to send it back." So, I began. "Back in my day, stores provided something called customer service. I expect to receive that from you as well," he retorted. Annoyed by his sense of entitlement, but also just exhausted from the situation. I agreed to provide a return label. I asked him to continue the conversation over email since I couldn't provide a return label over the phone. He sent his email, rehashing all his complaints from the phone call, and I replied with this: I can provide you with a return label, but you need to be able to print it off so you can attach it to the item. That was 2 months ago, and he never replied to that email. Today, he called back. Hi, it's Bob. Remember me? He asked. Sorry, Bob, but I speak to many people every day. You'll need to refresh my memory, I responded. With that, he was fuming again. It was as if me not remembering him was the worst sort of insult. He rehashed everything again, and then it all came flooding back to me. My immediate thought was, didn't this happen months ago? And I was right, it did. I checked the email chain and saw that I sent my email on June 16th. He again complained about having to ship the item back himself and needing access to a printer. But because I was annoyed, I simply said, that's the way the world works now. I can't change that. He then said, I'm sick of this. I've had enough for today. I'll call back later. Then he hung up. I was hoping that would be the last I'd hear from him for another 2 months. But no, he replied to my email from 2 months ago within an hour. He again started complaining about how we had made this difficult for him and insisted that we should make accommodations for people who don't have a printer. I replied, saying, we can provide you with a PDF of the label, and if you don't have a printer, you could ask a friend, a relative, or even the post office to print it for you. Here's the kicker, the absolute cherry on top of his entitlement. This is your problem to fix, not mine. Your store has set up a system that requires the use of a printer, without any consideration for people who are too old to use modern technology. I will not go out of my way to fix a problem that you created. You need to tell the courier to print the label themselves and have them deliver it to my house. Wow, I haven't replied yet, but there are so many things I would like to say. Firstly, is this our system? Welcome to the 21st century. We didn't invent the need for a printer. Couriers are the ones who generate the PDF files, not us, but that is the easiest way to do it. Your refusal to understand that doesn't make you right. Secondly, this is definitely a you problem. I understand not owning your own printer. I don't own one either, but you could easily take the PDF to a friend or a family member who does have one. Even if you don't have friends, shocking, or family, you could take the item to the post office and ask them to print the label and stick it on the parcel. But no, you have such a vendetta against technology that you refuse to partake in it. It's almost as if you think finding a printer somehow enables this behavior, and your refusal to use one is an act of defiance meant to break us from our reliance on technology so we can go back to a simpler time. Well, buddy, I've had enough. Either pay to ship it back yourself or forget about your refund. If you don't want to enable our reliance on technology, fine. But I don't want to enable your entitlement. So if this is our stalemate, so be it. We don't lose anything. You're the one who wants to return the item because you changed your mind. So the next move is yours. Story 3. I was approaching 40, and after more than 10 years of legal practice, I had learned a lot of lessons. However, one of the most important lessons came from an older lawyer I worked for as a summer student after my second year of law school. A lawyer has 3 duties, he told me. First to himself, second to the court, and last to the client. Always make sure you come first, and the client comes last. The reason? Because clients will mess you up, he said. They'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice. I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and a bit foolish, I chose to work downtown instead. I'm still working downtown now, but fortunately, I remembered this lesson. It came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was a mid-sized company that had various operations and owned several properties. It wasn't large enough to be publicly traded, but it did have a significant real estate portfolio. One day, a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they assigned Frank, a veteran employee, to handle it. Frank was nearing 60, and believed he knew what he was doing. He didn't think he needed my help with the insurance claim and insisted he had everything under control. Besides, he thought lawyers were too expensive. Some people take great pride in avoiding legal fees, and Frank was one of those who gloated over every penny he managed not to pay to lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always trying to save money. "The insurer is going to mess you up," I told Frank. It was only by chance that I even knew about the fire and the loss because Frank hadn't asked for my help. He had just mentioned it in passing. From that point on, I kept a close eye on the situation, trying to get Frank to take things seriously. I had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form just to make sure he hadn't made any mistakes. Frank messed up a lot, and I often wondered how he managed to keep his job. But at least the proof of loss form was correct, so that was one less thing to worry about. "You don't know that," Frank said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. "I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to take advantage of my clients," I said. "And the insurer is going to take advantage of you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests, questions, and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you unless you sue them." Frank, however, insisted that he knew what he was doing, that everything was under control, and besides, he got along great with the insurance adjuster. "The limitation period expires in 2 weeks," I warned him. "Once those 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying, 'Sorry, you're out of time,' and that will be the end of it. Don't leave this until the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time." Frank was dismissive, saying, "Sure, fine, whatever, don't bother me. I've got this," and he got off the phone as quickly as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and once more a couple of days before the deadline. "I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me," my final email stated. "But you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue." He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to handle my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and there was still no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, and still no word. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I thought to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. "Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about?" We'd only spoken about it a dozen times. I figured he was calling to gloat, so I cut to the chase. "So they paid out. That's great, Frank. You were right." He seemed confused and asked if he could see a copy of the claim. "What claim?" I asked. "The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim." "Does that mean the insurer didn't pay?" I asked. He abruptly hung up on me, and a few minutes later, my computer dinged with an email from Frank. He claimed we had spoken, and he had instructed me to sue, and now he was worried because he hadn't received a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get one. I emailed him back. "I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just as I predicted they wouldn't. And now that the limitation period has expired, they've told you you're out of luck, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it?" I had made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me. But if I had, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now, so I copied Frank's boss, his boss's boss, and Bill, the client's in-house counsel, on my response. Bill acknowledged my email right away and called me later that day. "Frank messed up," he said. "We know that. He's a fool. So what do we do?" So his excuses didn't work. Nope. Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I had sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he had instructed me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role is over. The company knew Frank was deceiving them. "So that's it, then?" Bill asked. "We just lost a couple of $1 million. "It's okay," I said, explaining that when I realized Frank was going to mess up, I had filed a claim against the insurer. Because I had made Frank send me the proof of loss earlier, I had enough information to sue and preserve the cause of action. It wasn't a perfect claim and lacked some details, but it was good enough. You sued without instructions? Bill asked. Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without explicit instructions because if you do, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions. Yes, I said. I sued without instructions. I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. It's a little rough, I admitted, but we can always amend it. Thank goodness, Bill said. Can I leave it with you? Of course, he could. The insurer was in a weak position, and I knew I'd recover the money for the client with no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another employee who worked for the client, someone I didn't usually deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Frank, I said. What's going on? It turned out that Frank had been called into another meeting, where they handed him a one-page letter. After that, he packed up his office belongings into a box, and security escorted him past his co-workers to the elevator and down to the parking lot. That was the end for Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank. But for me, he became just an anecdote, a cautionary tale I sometimes share with young lawyers over drinks, maybe too often, as I'm getting older and have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus. But the guy who replaced him was great and never tried to save money at my expense, so in the end, it all worked out. Story 4. What would you have done in this scenario? I'm annoyed. I was shopping at Costco and my blood sugar unexpectedly went low. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I stopped in the Costco eating area for pizza and a smoothie. I'm parked at one of the indoor picnic tables sitting in my wheelchair, but I was clearly using the picnic table. I didn't want to eat messy food over my lap. Space for eating inside of the store is limited and Costco is packed due to it being summer here. Before I know it, a family of 3 comes and sits at my little picnic table. The wife scoffs at me saying I already had a place to sit, and proceeded to nod at my tiny manual wheelchair. She told me I didn't need the table, and that I should get up and leave so that her and her family would have a place to sit. Apparently, I'm supposed to eat in my wheelchair with no table surface and super messy food. I'm not kidding. Costco has some of the messiest pizza you can eat. Pizza grease gets everywhere when you eat it. The woman stood there staring at me like she fully expected me to grab my wheels and roll away. But I had no desire to leave the table that I had found first. And on top of that, I really didn't particularly want to sit next to her screaming toddler. It was just a weird experience. I wouldn't have minded sharing my table if they asked me nicely. It would have been awkward and uncomfortable as hell. Who wants to sit with a bunch of uninvited strangers? I then had a brilliant idea. One thing that I buy as a female in bulk at Costco is feminine hygiene products. So I just smiled at this woman who fully expected me to move. I lifted my gigantic box of feminine hygiene products out of my shopping cart and plopped them up on my half of the table. They took up a good half of the picnic table because it was a big bulky box of them. But they were very clearly marked. There was no mistaking what that box was full of. I smiled at the woman and I told her she could absolutely sit at my table with me. Her little girl read the box label and asked her mom what pads are for. Well, let's just say that was the end of that entitled woman. The woman gasped in horror and quickly ushered her little girl away from me. The girl was far too young to know what pads were used for yet. Clearly, they couldn't sit next to a devil like me. I got to enjoy my unanticipated low blood sugar in peace. Normally, low blood sugar makes me feel like absolute shit. But this time I felt quite pleased. Nobody should have to eat in their wheelchair. Handicapped people have a right to use the table too. Story 5. I have a story that started before the COVID pandemic and just concluded a while back. I am a typical simple guy who just likes relaxing and was born with the proverbial silver spoon in my mouth. I am the black sheep of my family and a middle child to boot, double whammy, but I at least have a little brains and some luck, which I kind of use on a day-to-day basis. Due to my parents' connections, I managed to get into lucrative schools in my country, did my military service, and was promoted upward to captain, and later on was shipped off to college out of the country. I have never been too close with many people apart from my circle of friends, and I prefer it that way. After my college, I was employed in government, you guessed it, family connections, and after a few years was able to use my name to get ahead and meet people who helped me set up several businesses in my area, a coastal city where this story happens. The money I used was generally allowances, small inheritance from my late grandma, some investments, a fund that was started when I was a baby, and money gifted to me by my family. Basically an attempt not to leave me broke enough to embarrass them, even though I am a simple low-maintenance fellow lol. My businesses are booming since the coastal area we live in attracts a lot of tourists, local and international, and of course some locals who wish to mingle with the tourists to get green cards, pen pals, spouses and such. Typical coastal city, I guess. The incident. As a proprietor of my businesses, I have most, if not all, of my staff on salary, since it's the best way for them to gain benefits, and is easier for me as a business owner. Tax-wise, tipping is more of a gift typically, since we do not have a tipping culture, and I have my staff on comprehensive medical insurance, which has additional dental and optical on top of the National Governmental Healthcare Medical Scheme. Our government hospitals provide all services free, but wait times for elective surgeries are exhausting. We also have a mandatory legal requirement to provide employees with retirement benefit savings. Minimum of 21 working days leave. I give 30, and my businesses offer paid overtime, unhindered medical leave for surgery and serious conditions, which can be extended, as well as allowances to seek treatment such as chemo or dialysis. One of my female employees, an older lady who is brilliant and had moved up the ranks to manager, and was adored by all, was booked for a hysterectomy, since, as she told me, she was at risk of cervical cancer as her mother had passed from it a few years back, and since she already had 4 kids, it was the most logical step. She did her due diligence and found a private hospital which was in our system where she could have the procedure done. On the planned date, she applied for leave days, which we obviously rejected since this fell under the scope of medical leave. She went on to have the procedure successfully and had a quick recovery time. The bill was to be catered for by the company insurance, and we had made sure to get all the necessary pre-authorizations. A few months later, she came to work looking distraught, and in all honesty, we thought that she had been told that she had gotten cancer since she had asked for a day off to go for review and tests, but what happened was much worse. She had been given a bill by the hospital since the insurance had refused to pay for it, citing that it was not in the scope of cover. We were livid since we had made sure everything was in effing order. I sent my accounts manager to go have a talk with the insurance people as we tried to calm her down. The manager came back super angry and told me that basically after showing them the evidence, the insurance people just told him to buzz off. I decided to personally go visit that office and get a clear understanding of what was happening. They kept me waiting for an hour, and even after that had the audacity to inform me the director from the head office, who was in the area, had declined to meet me because he was busy. I was angry, so I decided to go to their head office in the capital city, a 2-hour flight. The head office was no help and informed me that they had revised their policy and that it was not covered. I asked when the policy was revised. They informed me a month prior. I informed them the surgery was done 5 months prior, and we had all the documents. They claimed that it was a 12 months retrospective. I inquired why I was not informed of it, since this was big news, and I have held policies with them, and they told me that they had informed their large clients and would inform the other clients when their insurances were due for renewal. I demanded to speak to their boss, company vice president, since the CEO was not around, and they boldly told me he had no time for me, and frankly that in verbatim, "We are a large company and have no time to argue semantics with low-end clients. If you don't like it, you can frankly leave and find a new insurance company." The revenge. If I had been initially angry, I was full-blown mad. I was livid and filled with rage. In all my years I may have experienced some disrespect, and I accepted it not to make problems, but this time it went too far. I decided in the heat of the moment to switch everything and be done with them. I flew back home and just plain went to the hospital and settled the bill in full and took the receipt to my employee, who initially insisted that she would do anything to pay me back, but I refused since it was no way her fault, and I wouldn't accept it if she pays for something that was way out of her control. I had a few days to cool down and talked with my directors. The words still etched on my mind. I asked how long it would take us to switch to another insurance. They went ahead and checked out a few large rivals of the insurance we had and discovered that if we switched it would take 6 months for the new insurance to provide full coverage. The firm we picked, who I'll call New Insurance, offered us a way better deal to the one we had, and not only comprehensive cover, dental and optical, they also included mental health cover, physiotherapy and occupational therapy cover, rehabilitative services, mobility device acquisition, prosthetics and wheelchairs for some of the disabled employees, smart cards for direct payment on outpatient visits, kind of like a debit card, and a dedicated team of relationship managers, death and funeral benefits, and an expanded coverage area plus up to 6 dependents plus spouse cover. It would cost me a little more, but I didn't really care. The people who dealt with us from our previous insurance, which I'll call Old Insurance, seemed unfazed that I was pulling my company from them, since they thought it was just a small business. They looked puzzled when I came in with several people and a few boxes of documents. What they failed to realize was that apart from that one business, which is a restaurant, I have 3 popular bars, a cab company, a hotel resort, cleaning service chain, a building and residential guard service, and several rental buildings in the town and around the country. Their shock was compounded when they were informed by the lawyer just who I am, and the shock, awe, confusion, and panic when they heard my family name was an extremely satisfying sight. Cue the pleading and attempted negotiations and apologies. It was so big that the news reached their head office, who sent not only their director, the one who was apparently too big to see me, but also their chief legal officer, chief financial officer, and president of the company. I somehow also earned a personalized call from their CEO, who was abroad. No amount of sweet talking was changing my mind, and by the end of 6 weeks, we had completely removed ourselves from the old insurance. It was now a waiting game to the beginning of the new insurance cover, and we really hoped that no one would become unwell by that time, but we were ready just in case. In that waiting time, and after the new insurance commenced, I talked to my friends and my family on one of my holiday visits. My older brother's kids adore me, and my family kind of realized they were a holes to me and are trying to re-enter my life and thought that was that. Aftermath. My friends and family took my words and also pulled their businesses from the insurance to other insurances. The company took such a huge hit, and when COVID came around and was a big deal, they were barely floating. They went into receivership soon after and were acquired by the insurance I had moved to, who happened to be their greatest rivals. The directors and CEO were given their golden parachutes and resigned, and most of their employees were luckily retained apart from the senior executives, including the ones who told my manager to buzz off. In a cruel twist of irony, the building they were operating on in our town was sold, and if you guessed I purchased it, you would be absolutely correct. I decided to remodel the inside and turn it to a business rental space. All in all, it was a bit of a sweet payback, and wherever they are, I hope those disrespectful guys learned that everyone is human, and they are not above anyone, and remember that karma is a cold and heartless witch. Story 6. Okay, a little background on my town before we begin. I live in a suburban town in Indiana. Our town is about 45% Hispanic heritage and about 45% European heritage, with a 10% other. We're kind of poor, the majority of the town being lower middle class, with some notable exceptions, that one housing project. What we do have is education. We test higher than almost any other school in the state, so we as a city get tens of millions of dollars that unusually get wasted on swimming pools and such. A little background on my first job. I worked at the Boys and Girls Club. For you non-Americans, it's like a mass babysitting operation, but there's homework help. My job was to take 7th hour to bike to the BGC. It counted as a service credit, even though I got paid. Swap into my uniform. Wait. Sign the elementary kids in. Take their bags. And then when they are all there, go to the elementary room and keep them from getting bored and committing mutiny. I was 14 at the time, short for my age, and a real squeaker, but formal as all get out, and eager to make money. I mean help the community. Cast is edible macaroni, also known as the entitled mother. Endangered koala, also known as the entitled kid. Old Yeti, who is the manager, older, chubby, hairy gentleman that everyone loves. And finally, me. This story takes place during my first week of work. I was waiting for the buggers to come storming in. When I glanced from my seat into the parking lot, the entryway was made of glass, and both rooms on either side have massive windows, so I could see the parking lot fairly easily from my seat. And this Ferrari, a literal Ferrari, in our sleepy town, pulls up into a parking spot. It's 2:30, I have just changed, and none of the elementary schools are out yet. As I stare in awe of the beauty of a car, in comes the entitled duo. Entitled mother, hello, I'd like to drop my kid off. Me, is he registered at this or the nearby town boys and girls club? No. Turning back to my book, gesturing to the stack of papers on the counter, I tell her, fill out one of those, take the safety waiver. That's a lot of work. Do I have to? It is a page and a half. It's not that bad, and yes, you have to. The entitled mother takes the paper, mumbling something about not my job and jerk kids these days. She fills it out. Takes her about 6 minutes. I've put my book away and gotten my supplies out, ready for the first of 7 waves of kids. She sauntered over to my desk and handed me the papers. I went to make a copy to give to her, as well as to put the paper on the scanner so he's in our database. The entitled mother starts to walk off. Me, ma'am, you need your copy. She sighs and turns around to say, okay, just give it to me. Also, you didn't pay. It's $15 a year for our services. For you non-Americans, that's about the price of a golf pencil per day. Literally less expensive than the wheat in the free snack. I'm not paying that. Ma'am, we provide free access to a snack, computers, a large library, a gym, arts and crafts, and valuable friendships, all at no extra charge. My little angel should get it for free. He's a good kid academically. Me, internally, he's in 2nd grade. What the hell could this snot magnet have done? But out loud, I say, if you register through any school in the hometown school system, they could give you a reduced price for academic excellence. Can't you do it? Just then, you hear the bell at the elementary school next door to the BGC. I had about 150 seconds until Hell's armies would come in, and chaos would descend for the next 5 hours. Old Yeti also walks by, and I breathe a sigh of relief. Me, hey old Yeti, can you help with this lovely lady over here? Translation, can you give this witch the business end of a stern talking to? Entitled mother, just give it to me. Her kid runs off into the K2 room, not technically registered or signed in. Old Yeti, I would love to, but I have to help Chef Johnny make the cereal bars for snack. Translation, sorry no, I ain't got the patience for her. Ma'am, I am not in authority to give you anything for free. If you do not just hand over $15, I will have to call your kid to the front desk and have you 2 leave. The gates of hell open, loud, smelly, and wanting to play with their friends. Another employee stops them where the entryway meets the commons, saving me a headache, but I knew waves 2 and 3 were no more than 5 minutes away. Entitled mother, dear God, people in this town are so stupid, I just want it for free. Me, not completely done with it, but almost. Listen, ma'am, I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes signing kids in. Then I have to deal with their nonsense for another 5 hours. I will almost certainly need to clean up at least one kid who didn't bother to use the restroom. I will likely have to clean a Wii remote so it doesn't give some kid diphtheria or something. I'm ranting now. I have to deal with almost 200 immature kids for minimum wage. I will graciously add your little pile of trash to that list. a prediction of that child that was correct. He was on thin ice for the entire time I was there. But I will not, and I repeat not, deal with an adult more immature than the children. So either pay the $15 or get you and your snot bag out of this establishment. I hear the lady that was keeping hell at bay mumble, "Wow." The entitled mother, red with embarrassment, meekly reaching into her wallet, says, "Here you go, sir. Thank you and have a lovely day." She handed me $100 bill. Just that little extra work to give her change still angers me to this day. By this time, Wave 2 had arrived, and she had gotten a ticket for parking in a handicapped spot. I didn't clear the entryway until after Wave 5, leaving me exhausted for the rest of my shift. The kid almost got banned several times for attempting to harm staff members, namely me. An old Yeti died just last month, and a memorial to his work now stands in the playground.